In Ingrid's perfume shop, where bottles gleamed under soft lights and fragrances blended in the air, Jonathan walked with determined steps. His mind was always at work, planning, analyzing every detail of the business that he, though unofficially, ran with an iron hand. Ingrid, his wife, was the face of the perfume shop, but it was Jonathan who controlled things behind the scenes, from finances to staff selection. Jonathan, a man with stern features and impeccably groomed hair, retreated to his office, a sanctuary of calm amidst the constant bustle of the store. Sitting behind his mahogany desk, he mentally reviewed the list of employees. His gaze lingered on one name, Jane. There wasn't actually a concrete reason for his aversion to Jane. She was efficient, discreet, and customers often praised the cleanliness of the place. But there was something about her, perhaps the way she carried a silent dignity, that deeply bothered him. Jonathan liked to be in control, and Jane somehow seemed immune to his influence. "I need someone more moldable," he muttered to himself, flipping through the job candidate's dossier. His choice fell on a young college graduate, eager for an opportunity, and more importantly without the baggage of Jane's experiences. Someone who wouldn't question, who would simply follow orders. With the decision made, Jonathan called Ingrid into his office. She entered, an elegant and serene figure, her hair pulled back into a sophisticated bun. "Ingrid, I need to discuss a change in the team with you," Jonathan began, keeping his voice neutral. Ingrid looked at him, a hint of concern in her eyes. "What happened, John?" "There's an employee, Jane. I think it's time we bring in someone new, more aligned with the image we want to project," Jonathan explained, avoiding eye contact with Ingrid. "But Jane has been working here for years." "She's part of the perfume shop's family," Ingrid replied, surprised and somewhat alarmed. Jonathan stood up, approaching her. "You know, I only want the best for the business. Jane has done a good job, but we need someone with more energy, more youthful spirit." Ingrid hesitated, looking at Jonathan. "If you think it best," she said, though with a hint of doubt in her voice. Satisfied, Jonathan flashed a calculated smile. "Trust me, this is for the good of our perfume shop." As Ingrid left the office, Jonathan sat back down, his thoughts already focused on the next step of his meticulously crafted plan. After the abrupt dismissal, Jane felt a whirlwind of emotions. Disappointment weighed heavily on her heart, but there was no room for resentment in her resilient soul. She could have sought out Ingrid, begged for her job back, or even exposed Jonathan's unjust severity. But she chose to maintain her dignity. Instead, she sought refuge in the small, urban oasis that was the cafe across the street. The cafe was cozy, a stark contrast to the coldness of her recent experience. The weathered wooden tables had a charm of their own, and the iron chairs invited visitors to sit and watch the world go by. And that's what Jane did. Sitting by the window, with a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, she gazed at the perfume shop. Customers came and went, and she could almost hear the tinkling of the door chimes, imagining the sweet and floral scent that always greeted her at work. "Are you okay, dear?" the waitress asked, a young woman with curly hair tied back with a colorful bandana. Her name was Marcy, and she had the kind of smile that calmed inner storms. Jane offered a sad smile. "Yes, I'm just getting used to a new routine." Marcy gently placed her hand on top of Jane's. "If you want to talk, I'm here." Jane nodded gratefully. "I just need some time to watch," she said, looking back at the perfume shop. Day after day, Jane took her place in the cafe. Over time, she became part of the furniture, a constant presence that other customers recognized with friendly nods. And as she watched the store that had almost been a home to her from afar, Jane didn't know that she would soon find herself at the heart of a much larger plot than the trivialities of an unfair dismissal. She only knew that there was something comforting about being near, even if from a distance, to what was so familiar to her. "Now tell us, what would you do in Jane's place? Would you accept the dismissal, or would you appeal to the owner, Ingrid? Leave your thoughts in the comments." The cafe had become Jane's sanctuary since her dismissal, a place where the scent of roasted coffee beans mixed with memories of the perfume shop that still clung to her. The corner by the window, with its unobstructed view of the store across the street, served as a private observation post. She frequented the place not only to savor the comforting bitterness of coffee, but also to somehow stay connected to the life she had left behind. On a particularly busy afternoon, as the buzz of conversations around her formed a constant chorus, Jane noticed a figure crossing the street towards the perfume shop. It was Jonathan, accompanied by a man she had never seen before. The stranger had a hurried gait and a gaze that swept the surroundings as if searching for prying ears. From her table, Jane watched the two men engage in an intense conversation, their expressions serious and gestures precise. Curiosity and apprehension intertwined in her stomach. "Is this a new supplier?" she murmured to herself, peering through the rising steam from her cup. The words exchanged between Jonathan and the mysterious man were inaudible, but their body language was an open book of ill intentions. At one point, the unknown man pulled a thick envelope from inside his coat, glancing around before discreetly passing it to Jonathan. The exchange was swift, but Jane was certain of what she had witnessed. "I don't like that," she said more to herself than anyone else. However, Jonathan noticed he was being watched. Seeing Jane's concerned expression, Marcy the waitress approached cautiously. "Is something wrong, Jane?" Jane shook her head, not wanting to involve the girl in her suspicions. "Just some old concerns," she replied, but her eyes didn't leave the suspicious duo across the street. It was obvious that something was being planned. Something that could harm the perfume shop and, by extension, Ingrid. Jane knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen. Despite being ousted from the perfume shop, the people who worked there and Ingrid herself still meant a lot to her. With a determined sigh, she decided it was time to take action. "I need to find out more," Jane whispered, already planning her next move. After all, she wasn't just a spectator. She still felt like a part of that story, and now perhaps the key to preventing an imminent disaster. The sunlight was beginning to bid farewell to the sky when Jane was approached by Jonathan and the enigmatic man she had observed earlier. They found her at the cafe's exit, their somber faces contrasting with the golden twilight. "Jane, what a surprise to find you here," Jonathan began, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man at his side, a sinister-looking individual with a demeanor that betrayed his cunning nature, remained silent, but his restless eyes fixed on her. Jonathan continued, pulling a thick envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket. "We understand that you might have seen something you shouldn't have, and we are willing to ensure that this is advantageous for you." Jane eyed the envelope, aware of the weight of what was being offered and what it meant. Her heart pounded, not with greed but with indignation. "Are you offering me money to stay quiet?" Jane asked, her voice steady despite the shock. "Consider it a retirement bonus," suggested Jonathan, extending the envelope toward her. With a look of disdain, Jane pushed Jonathan's hand away. "I won't accept your dirty money. What you're planning will hurt many people and I won't be a part of it." The man beside Jonathan furrowed his brow, a slight tremor of irritation passing across his face. "You're making a big mistake," he said in a low, threatening voice. Jane took a deep breath, gathering all the courage she had. "The mistake is yours if you think you can buy someone's silence so easily. I suggest you abandon these nefarious plans." Jonathan closed the envelope, his expression hardening. "This isn't a choice, Jane. It's a unique opportunity to get out of this situation comfortably." "I choose integrity, not comfort," Jane replied unwavering, "and I will fight with everything I have to protect what is right." With these words, Jane walked away, leaving the two men behind, her silhouette outlined against the twilight, a symbol of resistance against the corruption threatening to engulf the world. She loved. The night air was heavy with the promise of rain. As Jane walked along the narrow sidewalk, her thoughts consumed by the recent confrontation. The city lights blinked indifferently to the storm brewing not only in the sky, but in her life. The whisper of the wind seemed to carry echoes of the veiled threats that had been thrown at her. A growing engine noise interrupted her reverie. Jane instinctively turned, only to see the headlights of a car speeding toward her. The intense glare of the headlights blinded her, and she barely had time to register the shock before the impact came with brutal force, throwing her violently to the ground. The car, a black sedan, stopped a few meters ahead. The driver's door opened and Jonathan got out, his face a mask of conflicting horror and satisfaction. He approached Jane, who lay motionless on the asphalt, a solitary figure under the lamppost's light. "Jane," he called, his voice trembling slightly, perhaps afraid she would respond. But she didn't move, and the silence that surrounded her was a mute testament to the gravity of his actions. For a long moment, Jonathan stood there, watching, until the fear of what would happen if he were caught made him retreat. With quick steps and eyes that dared not look back, he returned to the vehicle. The engine roared to life, and he disappeared into the night, leaving Jane behind as nothing more than an obstacle removed. In the solitude of that dark street, time seemed to have stopped for Jane. A passerby, who happened to be returning home later that night, found her and called for help, their voice urgently pleading for an ambulance. As Jane was carried into the ambulance, her consciousness wavered at the border between light and darkness, life and something undefined. Jonathan, in the safety of his escape, was unaware that against all odds, Jane's indomitable spirit still burned with life, a flame on the verge of reigniting in the darkness he had created. 3 days passed, each marked by a tense silence in the hospital's sterile corridors. On the third day, as the sun cast its first rays over the awakening city, Jane opened her eyes. The hospital room white light was diffuse, filtered through half curtains, and the sounds of the ward filtered to her in a constant murmur. Awareness returned to Jane slowly, like a tide returning to the shore. Memories of the accident were fragmented, but the recollection of the confrontation with Jonathan was crystal clear, sharpened by danger and injustice. She tried to move, but the searing pain reminded her of her physical vulnerability. Nevertheless, her determination was unwavering, her mind already weaving plans to expose the conspiracy that had nearly cost her life. As Jane struggled to sit up, a hurried figure crossed the hospital corridor, their steps echoing with urgency. It was Ingrid, her former employer. When Jane was younger, she had become pregnant, and her parents did not approve, so she ended up giving her daughter up for adoption. And she never heard from her daughter again. However, on the day following Jane's accident, Ingrid found out and rushed to the hospital to help. Jane needed blood and Ingrid made a donation, and after some tests before the transfusion to ensure compatibility, the nurse discovered that Ingrid was Jane's daughter. Upon noticing Ingrid's presence, Jane was overjoyed, and Ingrid told her that Jane needed blood, and she donated it and ended up discovering that Jane was her mother. As the conversation unfolded, Ingrid, whose eyes reflected a whirlwind of concern and fear. With the conversation unfolding, Ingrid said, "How are you feeling?" Jane looked at Ingrid, seeing not only the successful businesswoman, but also the daughter she had lost so many years before. "I'm alive, which is something," Jane replied, her voice weak but tinged with the relief of seeing her daughter. "You'll be okay, Jane. I'll take care of everything," Ingrid assured, stroking Jane's hand. "Don't worry about anything, just focus on getting better." Jane squeezed Ingrid's hand, a mother's gratitude and love shining in her eyes. "Ingrid, there's something you need to know," Jane began, each word and effort. "About the accident. It wasn't just an accident." Ingrid leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Jane. "What do you mean, Jonathan, and a plan that could destroy everything you built?" Jane whispered, urgency clear on her pale face. Ingrid felt her heart race faster, realizing that the truth was more complex and darker than she had imagined. There, in the hospital room with a woman who was an enigma and yet a savior, Ingrid realized that their lives were intertwined in ways she could never have foreseen. And in that moment, she made a silent promise to protect Jane and uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As Jane lay in the hospital bed, the days passed with the peculiar slowness of places where hope and despair intersect. Her body was in the process of healing, but it was her spirit that carried the weight of an untold story, a truth that pulsed within her with an urgency intensified by the accident. Ingrid visited her daily, bringing not only flowers and fruits, but also a presence that was deeply comforting to Jane. With each visit, the connection between the two women became more palpable, a bond that went beyond sympathy or gratitude. As mother and daughter reconnected in that hospital room, a different battle unfolded in the courts. Jonathan, with his boundless ambition and distorted morality, faced the consequences of his nefarious actions. Justice, with its impartial scale, began to tip against him. In the days and weeks that followed, while Jonathan struggled under the weight of the law, Jane and Ingrid embarked on their own journey of healing. It was a slow process, filled with long conversations and meaningful silences, shared tears, and surprising laughter. Each meeting was an opportunity to fill the empty spaces left by time, to smooth the edges of old wounds. "I have so much to tell you," Ingrid murmured on one of those visits, her head resting near Jane's on the hospital bed. "And I want to hear it all," Jane replied, the promise in her words as firm as the grip of their intertwined hands. In those moments, mother and daughter not only shared stories but also interwove their lives anew, rebuilding what had been broken and celebrating what could never be lost again. Each day, each revelation, they healed a little more of the wounds of a time that, though lost, now served as the foundation for a new beginning. As the days went by, the precious and newly discovered bond between Jane and Ingrid flourished, fueled by mutual care and countless conversations that extended through the hours of hospital visits. Ingrid, who had lived most of her life under the shadow of a loss that never happened, found in Jane not only the mother she had mourned, but also a wise counselor and a safe harbor. With Jane's recovery came a transformation in her role in Ingrid's life. As she left the hospital bed, she crossed the threshold of the perfume shop, not as an employee anymore, but as a matriarch whose presence was as vital as the air to breathe. Gradually, the store that had been her workplace became a shared space of dreams and strategies for the future. "I don't know how I never saw, how I never felt there was something special about you," Ingrid confessed one day, while both were sitting in the back room of the perfume shop, surrounded by financial records and new fragrance designs. Jane, now dressed in elegant clothes that reflected her new position, smiled affectionately. "Maybe we weren't ready for each other before," she suggested, "but we are now, and that's what matters." Jane not only brought her maternal instinct to the perfume shop, but also a savvy for business that surprised even Ingrid. "I didn't know you understood so much about finance and marketing," Ingrid said on a particularly productive day. "My life has taught me more than just cleaning and organizing my daughter," Jane replied with a discerning look. "I always observed, always learned." Under Jane's guidance, the perfume shop experienced a renewal. She implemented changes that not only revitalized sales but also strengthened the team's morale. And for Ingrid, having her mother by her side meant that the days of being deceived by those she trusted were over. Jane was her unwavering ally, the voice of experience and unconditional love. "From now on, we are in this together," Jane stated with conviction, "and I will ensure that no one takes advantage of you or this place that is ours." Ingrid looked at her mother, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. "With you here, I know everything will be okay." And so what began as an employer-employee relationship evolved into a partnership deeply rooted in mutual respect and dedication. Together, they were ready to face whatever the future held, with the certainty that the bond between them was the strongest foundation the perfume shop and their lives could have. That was the story. Thank you for watching until the end, and until next time. You.